This video will be exploring the actual date of Jesus' crucifixion. Most people believe that Jesus was crucified on a Friday in either 30 or 33 AD. This is based upon our tradition of Good Friday as the day of Jesus' crucifixion. However, this belief is based upon traditions rather than on sound research. In this video, we will ignore a priori beliefs. A priori is a preconceived belief that is not based upon evidence that can be independently verified. Instead, we will use empirical evidence to form our conclusions. In Scripture, there is evidence that a portion of a period was counted as the full period. In Genesis 5, Adam is recorded as being 130 years old when Seth was born. However, we all know that it is almost impossible for children to be born on their father's birthday every time. The Bible starts off in the book of Genesis with a day as being a night followed by a day. The Israelites followed this tradition in keeping their days, with the day starting at sunset, usually 6 p.m., and ending with the next sunset. So, in the Bible, a Jewish day always followed a night-day cycle. The Bible uses the term Sabbath as a day of rest. We get our term holiday from this term. There were two types of Sabbaths in the Bible, a weekly Sabbath and high Sabbaths. There were 7 high Sabbaths each year. Passover, the Feast of Weeks, and the Day of Atonement are some of them. In John 19, it explicitly states that the day that Jesus was crucified was both a day of preparation and a high Sabbath. So, this day is not necessarily associated with the weekly, regular Sabbath on Saturday. Jesus explicitly stated that he would be in the grave for 3 days and 3 nights. This signifies 2 things. First, the cycle would begin before sunset and end during the night. Second, this would contain 6 12-hour periods or a portion thereof. At minimum, this would mean a 30-minute day followed by a 12-hour night, followed by a 12-hour day, followed by a 12-hour night, followed by a 12-hour day, followed by a 30-minute night. This leads to a minimum time in the grave of 49 hours, although it could have been as long as 14 hours longer. 3 hours the first day and 12 hours the last night, for a total of 63 hours. Mary Magdalene visited the tomb before sunrise on Sunday morning and found that Jesus had already risen from the grave. This gives us our first placeholder, with Jesus rising from the dead on what we would call Saturday night. Next, we count backwards. We have day 3, then we have night 2, then we have day 2, then we have night 1, and finally we have day 1. This means that Jesus was crucified on our Thursday, giving us the answer that Jesus was condemned, crucified, died, and was buried on Thursday during the daylight hours. The next question is, how does this conclusion align with other evidence? The first calendars were based upon the moon, with the month starting when the first crescent of the moon was spotted after the new moon. These calendars are called lunar calendars. The Babylonian calendar was a lunar calendar. Lunar calendars do not align with today's Gregorian calendar, which is based on the solar year. During Jesus' time on the earth, the Jewish calendar was based on the Babylonian calendar. To determine the key events, we need to look to Scripture. In John 18, it mentions that Pilate was the governor who condemned Jesus to the cross. Pilate ruled as governor in Judea from 26 to 36 AD. The next piece of the puzzle is found in Matthew chapter 3. In this passage, Jesus is coming to John the Baptist to be baptized by him. To add context, we look to the book of Luke, where it states that Tiberius was in his 15th year as Rome's emperor. Tiberius reigned as emperor from AD 14 to 37. Therefore, John's ministry began in either 29 or 30 AD, depending upon which month Tiberius began to reign. Thus, Jesus could not have been crucified prior to AD 29. This gives the range of possible years of Jesus' crucifixion as being between 29 and 36 AD. Next, we turn our focus on the month and day of Jesus' crucifixion. In John 13, it mentions that Jesus was about to celebrate the Passover meal. The book of Leviticus gives us the necessary dates, stating that the Passover, which represented when God passed over the Israelites in Egypt to strike down all the firstborn sons in Egypt, occurred at sunset on the 14th day of the first month of the Jewish calendar. The first month of the Jewish calendar was Nisan. So, at sunset on Nisan 14, the lamb was slaughtered. Then, the meal was prepared and eaten on Nisan 15, just after sunset. Jesus' Passover meal has become known as the Last Supper. Given the Jewish night-day cycle, Jesus was tried, crucified, and was buried on Nisan 15. To determine when the Jewish month on Nisan began in the years in question, AD 29 to 36, we need to look to the lunar cycle. Since a month always began at the sighting of the new crescent moon, we need to determine when these new moons occurred for these years. There are multiple new moon calculators available on the web. Many of them only deal with more recent years, and not with the years in question. However, 2 sources were found that provided the timing of the new moons for these years. While there was some minor variation between these 2 sources, their differences only varied from 3 to 5 minutes. One major flaw was found in one of the websites, where it provided the weekday for the new moon. The provided weekday could not be reconciled with an alternative solution, so it was discarded. This weekday is important because Nisan 15, the day that Jesus was crucified, was exactly 2 weeks later. This is a critical issue, so some additional steps will be needed to verify the weekday of Nisan 15 for these years. Comparing the weekday for source number 1 against the calculated weekday, we find that the source was off by a 2 to 3 day difference. The motto one should always follow is trust but verify. This means that one should always check the results provided before accepting the results. This will be the next step in our process. Weekdays are easy to determine based upon a few simple rules. First, weeks always have 7 days. Next, as long as one knows the exact number of days between 2 dates, one can divide this number by 7, and then adjust the day of the week by the remainder. Obtaining the number of days between 2 dates is also easy. The number of days in a year follows a predictable pattern. It is 365 days for most years, but for leap years the number of days increases to 366 days. Leap years occur every 4 years, except when the year is a century year, or a year which ends in 00. For these years, the year must be equally divisible by 400 to be considered a leap year. The challenge to this process is verification of the results. Today's spreadsheet apps limit their date functions to years 1900 and later. Thus, one cannot use a spreadsheet app's date formulas to solve this riddle. The first step is to build a table that contains all the years between the first possible year, AD 29, to a year within the spreadsheet app's range. It is recommended that the table include the years up to around 2023 to allow for proper testing and verification. For leap years, the number of days should be 366, while the other years should contain 365 days. Next, summarize the number of days between the start year and the target year. In our example, the target year is 2022, while the start year is 2021. Divide this number by 7 and then adjust the date, the month and day, to an equivalent date in 2022. For example, April 1st, 2021 becomes April 1st, 2022. Then, divide the number of days, 365, by 7 and you get a remainder of 1. Last, subtract the remainder from the resulting date, giving a date of March 31st, 2022. Spreadsheet apps can use this date to obtain the weekday. Finally, for verification, use the spreadsheet app's weekday function to calculate the weekday of the start date of April 1st, 2021. Compare the 2 resulting weekdays. They should be the same. Test this out for numerous dates, not neglecting testing for leap years as the starting year. You will find that when a starting year is a leap year, you will have to add 1 day to the calculated resulting date in the target year. Test this process out until you feel comfortable with the formula. Then, this formula can be applied to the possible years in question, AD 29 to 36. If everything tested out correctly, you can know the day of the week for these years for Nisan 15. Once you have the formula, copy it to a new worksheet. From there, modify the results to output the new moon date to 2022, Nisan 1 to 2022, alternate Nisan 1 to 2022, Nisan 15 to 2022, and alternate Nisan 15 to 2022. Then, apply the weekday calculation process to the Nisan 15 and alternate Nisan 15 dates to obtain the adjusted weekday. On the next few slides, we'll review this process to ensure you understand it. In our review of the calculation process, the first step is the building of the days in a year table. The top of the table is shown in the image to the right. Column B will contain the year, and it is a simple entry 2023, 2022, 2021, etc. An example of the formula for cell C2 is shown in the left-hand window. This formula would need to be copied to the subsequent rows, updating the reference in column B accordingly. Next is the step to do the verification of the results. The top of the table is shown in the left-hand window. The yellow fields indicate a data entry cell. The year is any year between 1900 and 2021. The months could be between March 03 and December 12. It is not advised to test out the month of February, as this month could be impacted by leap years, and the ability to verify this month in the years before 1900 are questionable. The month of January could be tested, but it would lack interest in this endeavor. The formulas for this table is shown on the right-hand window. Next in our review of the calculation process is the building of the new moon and Nisan 15 table. It needs to be shown in two parts because of the size of the table. This is part 1. The left part is shown in the image to the left. The formulas for the first row of the table are shown in the right-hand window. These formulas need to be copied to the subsequent rows, updating the references accordingly. One call-out is that column G is not shown because of the size of the table. However, anyone with some basic spreadsheet knowledge should be able to solve this formula for this column, as it is very similar to column H, except that the formula should only add 1 to the results, not 14. Furthermore, this column is for informational purposes only. Continuing our review of the calculation process, part 2 of the new moon and Nisan 15 table. The right part is shown in the image to the left. The formulas for the first row of the table are shown in the right-hand window. These formulas need to be copied to the subsequent rows, updating the references accordingly. Moving on to the calendars. As mentioned previously, the Jewish calendar was a lunar-based calendar. What is the impact of using a lunar calendar versus a solar calendar? Lunar calendars have 354.36707 days in their calendar. Meanwhile, solar years, which is the time it takes for the Earth to move around the Sun and return to the same point, have an average of 365.24217 days in the year. This is why the Gregorian calendar has leap years. The impact of this disparity is that lunar calendars would lag the solar year by 11 to 12 days every year. Thus, the Jews and any other civilization that used lunar calendars needed to adjust their calendar to keep the seasons aligned. They accomplished this by adding a leap month to their calendar periodically. The Jews had not come up with a uniform method of making this adjustment when Jesus was on the earth, so it was haphazard during the possible years for his crucifixion. Thus, a precise assignment of a Gregorian date to a Jewish date is impossible for this reason. That said, one can get to a very reasonable answer, one that is beyond reasonable doubt but not beyond all doubt. As a reminder, the Jewish month was dependent on the sighting of the first crescent moon after a new moon. While Israel is in an arid environment, cloudy days could still occur. When the clouds obscured the new crescent moon, the official start of the month would fall to the next day. This fact will play an important role in our quest to determine the date of Jesus' crucifixion. Similarly, if the sighting was after 6 p.m. or the start of the Jewish day, then it would cause the month to begin one day later. As a final note, a key assumption for this result is that it is assumed that Nisan 1 fell between March 15th and April 15th for the years in question. We'll address alternative time periods after we review the first set of results. These are the best estimates for the possible times for Jesus' crucifixion. In AD 32, the new moon occurred after 6 p.m., after the start of the Jewish day. Thus, Nisan 1 would be counted as starting the next calendar day. This had no impact on the overall conclusions. The only possible year for Jesus' crucifixion is in AD 35, based upon the requirement of a Thursday crucifixion and burial. For this date to be possible, cloud cover had to have occurred for the new moon of this year. Scripture makes it clear that Jesus was buried for 3 days and rose on the first day of the week, which was our Sunday. Thus, the traditional years for Jesus' crucifixion, AD 30 and 33, are ruled out. The crucifixion would have occurred over the weekend rather than in the middle of the week as shown in the Gospels. There are several key points that need to be made now. As the governor of Judea, Pilate was charged with ensuring that the Jews did not revolt against Rome. Pilate's failure to secure the body of a person that was alleged to be the king of the Jews would be seen as a failure in his duties. The missing body of the King of the Jews would be seen as a direct threat of Rome's rule over Judea and possibly challenging Rome itself. With that in mind, let us review some key facts that corroborate Jesus' crucifixion as being in AD 35. First, Pilate was removed from the governorship in AD 36, which was approximately a year later. Travel during those days often took months. And worse, travel by sea was nearly impossible during the winter months. Take note that Paul was shipwrecked because his ship left late in the season, just before the winter months closed in. So, a 6 to 18-month response time should be expected from the date of Jesus' resurrection to the time that Rome's response came back to Judea. Furthermore, Pilate committed suicide in AD 39, which was about 3 years after his dismissal. Therefore, one can conclude that Pilate's dismissal was due to the view that Rome was dissatisfied with his ability to carry out his duties. In addition, Matthew makes a comment about Pilate's wife's warning to him, alluding troubling times if Pilate got involved with Jesus' crucifixion. One must ask, why was this comment included if Pilate did not suffer any consequences from Jesus' body disappearing? And any consequences would necessarily be a short time after the event, not many years later, as suggested by the traditional resurrection years of AD 30 and 33. While the focus of this video to this point has been based on the assumption that Jesus' crucifixion occurred during our period of mid-March to mid-April, let us now consider other alternatives. One possible date was March 11th, 31. However, this is unlikely since Pilate would not have suffered any consequences to his failure to secure Jesus' body. Another date was March 9th, 34. This is more possible, but it still would indicate that a very slow response from Rome occurred, since it was outside of the window of opportunity of 6 to 18 months. It is possible that Rome was very slow to respond, but it seems doubtful that such a delay would be this slow for such a massive failure on Pilate's part. Another possible date was April 27th, 32. However, this is unlikely since Pilate would not have suffered any consequences to his failure to secure Jesus' body. Another possible date was April 26th, 35, but this is not materially different from the proposed April 12th, 35 date advanced earlier. So, while these dates are possible, they lack a key ingredient of a quick and decisive response from Rome for Pilate's failure. This would imply that Rome was negligent, which does not align with what is known about Rome during those years. Other dates are also possible, but they would all have a similar relationship to Rome's lack of response as the proposed alternative dates given above. In conclusion, Jesus was most likely crucified on April 12, 35. This date addresses all the known facts and clues. It addresses why Pilate was dismissed from the governorship a year later. It addresses why Matthew included Pilate's wife's comment about Jesus. And, most important, this date is not based upon any traditions or a priori beliefs. It is based solely upon empirical evidence that anyone with even a limited knowledge of spreadsheet apps can verify.